Okay, Rabbi, so we're Daf Tezain in Yerushalmi Peah. We're doing a quick revision. So the following make divisions in a field as far as having a separate obligation of Peah. So if you've got maybe a stream going through a stream of water or whatever it is, or maybe a path, a private path or public path, various things like that. If it's a fixed path for the year in the summer and the winter, or a piece of plowed land, or if there's other seed which is making a division between two fields. If one cuts produce in an earlier stage, let's say for animals, before it's ripened, that would also make a division between two fields. According, that's the view of Rabbi. The Chacham said it's not going to make a division unless you also plow the area as well. Okay, so the following make a division as far as Peah is concerned. The Torah says Sodcha, that you can't start separating Peah one field for the next. Now, that's not really clear that it's from the Torah, it's more rabbinical, because if you're going to tell me it's from the Torah, then if that's the case, even with a field of trees, we should say the same thing, and we don't. Now, we've learned that as far as making a hefsek between seeds, various things make a division. But as far as a field of trees, you need a fence to make a division. So you see that the laws of these gaps really are more rabbinical. Now, but a fence, it seems, it could be that is from the Torah, that would divide between various fields. But no, even that is not really from the Torah. Because if it was from the Torah, then now there is a din that if the branches interlock above the fence, then they sort of nullify the effect of the fence. Now, why should they do that? If this fence makes a division from the Torah, the branches interlocking shouldn't make a division. Now, we've learned if there is the branches interlocking, it does cancel the effect of the fence. And you can give one lot of Peah for the whole thing. So that tells me that even the fence dividing is not really a clear Minat Torah division. It's only a rabbinical one. Now, if you're going to tell me that actually it is from the Torah, then even if the branches are coming from one side only, going over the fence and mixing with the other side, but the other branches are still on their side, well, that the fence shouldn't really make a gap. And yet the din is, if it's mikan and mikan, it's only if the branch is coming from both sides, then the whole thing is connected. But from one side, the geder, it is a gap, right? If the branch is interlocking from the Torah, then there's no difference if it's coming from one side or not. It must be that the branches again is only a rabbanon din, and maybe that the din of a geder as well, or the fence, is also only a rabbinical din. Now, Rabbi Yossi said that it's you mustn't leave Peah from one field from another, but it's a din Torah, and if you over on that, if you did separate Peah, then it doesn't work. So they asked him, what about, let's say you have two separate fields, you have a boundary, and you have intention to putter the field on the other side of the boundary through Peah that you're leaving on this field, on this side of the boundary. Do you exempt the second field or not? So Rabbi Yossi didn't really want to give an answer. Now elsewhere we find Rabbi Yossi slightly differently, because elsewhere we've learned the Chachamim agree to Rekiva. Now if you're sowing dill or mustard in three places, and the way it should be through dill in three places and mustard in three places, now Shmuel said, why is it you have to leave Peah on each separate area? Because the first lot doesn't wait for ripening for the last lot. And Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yochanan, he says they also sow them in patches. Each patch is significant on its own. Now here, why is it over there? He's saying they're all separate, these various patches. And here he didn't want to answer Reb Zeira. He wasn't sure if a border makes a gap or not. So the one says, well, actually, Reb Zeira was clear. It makes a gap between two fields. It causes a chiyuv Peah. He says, all he's coming to tell you is that the question is, does it have a din of Peah or not? The stuff that grows in the border, right? Can you be Mekadesh it? Does it have a din of Peah on the nearby fields? And Rabbi Yasser didn't want to answer that. Rabbi Shia learned, if you separate Peah, let's say, from one field for the other, it doesn't help. And even if you leave Peah from the border itself, it doesn't help. It doesn't have a Shem Peah to start puttering the neighboring fields. Rabbi Hanina said, what about the grasses which were separate? Now they are mastikin for Peah, the chatzuvais. Rav Chisda asked, actually he wanted to say that these were special grasses Yeshua used to divide the land, because they went straight down. They didn't move to the side. That's what they used to give out the land. Now, when it comes to these branches, various streams are mastic in a field if water goes through it. If it pushes water. The waters flow through it. And nachal, even though there's no water going through, it might be a dry canal. There's no water going through it, or they're gathered in one area. Now, we also mentioned a private path, and then there's a public path under dividing. Why we need to mention both? Because a public path won't necessarily stop with trees, only with seeds. But maybe for trees you need to have a fence, as we've said. Now, a private path, why mention the public path? Because you get ones which are only in the summer and they're not fixed for the winter. So it depends when it's used. They've got to be fixed for use the whole year round. Now, we spoke about fallow land, or if there's another seed, that also divides between the two. So fallow land that's not been ploughed and not been sowed. Near is land that's been ploughed but not sowed. Base rova, we said an area that you can grow 104 square amas, right? A rova covers roim with the area that can grow 104 square amas, or another seed that grows in even the smallest amount. Rabbi Yechon said you have like a 2 amma gap, the 3 lots of the plough, 2 amma gap between them to divide between the fields. Now, is this a different opinion? Because he says, well, one talks about where there's a chiyuv peah, let's say, it depends if this produce has its own peah obligation. The other one talks about produce which doesn't have its own peah obligation, and then it's like 2 ammas. Now, if it's fallowed land, it's got no peah obligation. So he says, no, it depends on the different sizes of fields. Okay, if it's a big field, if it's bigger than a base rova, then you need the big area, whereas the smaller fields, let's say a smaller 100 ammas square, then you have maybe a 2 amma going across. So it really depends on the size of the field. We spoke about one who's cutting the shachas, okay? Now, let's say you start cutting away. We're on Daf Yud Test at the moment. So you start cutting away, it's not ripened, and then there's different parts of the field. You're leaving peah. The Chachamim hold cutting for an unripened amount doesn't divide the field into 2. So 1 lot of peah is enough. Rabbi held cutting for shachas is mafsik, makes a gap in the field. Shachas, he holds, has its own pay obligation, and that's called cutting. Now, Rav Zira said the name of Lazar, Rabbi and Rabbi Huda, they both said the same thing. Just like Rabbi said, one who cuts the shachas, it's mafsik between 2 parts of the field, so it's called a name of cutting. And Rabbi Huda holds that cuts the shachas is mafsik, it's got a name of cutting, right? He spoke about it, let's say, before the Omer offering. It's got a name cutting. So you mustn't cut new grain before the Omer offering has been bought. So the same thing, Rabbi Yehuda also said, that the cutting shachas, because it has its own obligation, and that divides between the fields, right? And you can't cut it before the Omer. So Rabbi also said, the reason why cutting shachas is mafsik in the field is because of chiyuv peah. Right? Where do we see Rameh holds that chiyuv peah, that something which has its own pay obligation makes a division between various fields? We've learned if, let's say, if locusts or something like that, if they start eating crops or other insects, or the wind breaks it down, it's potter from peah, because that's not considered cutting. But everyone agrees if you plough the area, that's when it's mafsik between the 2 areas. But if you don't plough it, it's not mafsik between the 2 areas. Now, everyone agrees? It's probably Rameh, who holds that if you cut crops which hasn't been ripened, that is mafsik with a field. And if it's cut through a person, not through a person, even Rameh would agree that it's not mafsik with a field. Okay? And he says, because the katzir is a p'tura peah. Okay? But if it's, he said he's dead because ripening is like it's a p'tura peah. But if he was chayav a peah, let's say people did it after it grew a third, then even if you don't actually plough the area, that already makes a division in the field. So basically, the din of hasik in a field depends on the chiyuv peah of the produce of that place. Okay. Now we quoted Rabbi Yehuda, like cutting shachas is forbidden before the Omer's offering because the chiyuv peah is machshavit to consider it as cutting. Where did Rabbi Yehuda say this? We've learned Rabbi Yehuda said, where do we say if you start cutting shachas before it's grown a third, it's not got a shem katsira. But if it's already grown a third, then you can't start cutting it before the Omer. It's got a shem katsira. Okay, and if you're going to cut it even 1 bit, then it's got a chiyuv peah, and something which has a chiyuv peah is mafsik in a field. So you see, Rabbi Yehuda holds the reason of chiyuv peah in shachas as well. Now we spoke about the Omer offering, and Rabbi Yehuda said his din like you started cutting before it grew a third. So if you start cutting before it grows a third, you can finish the cutting even though it carries on, even after it grows a third. Right? And we said that the din of Rabbi Yehuda is dependent on Chiyuv Peah. So as far as Peah is concerned, it will be the same din. If you start cutting before it grows a third, there's no Chiyuv Peah, even if you finish the cutting after it grew a third. And Rabbi Zira said, Rameh agrees to that, as far as making a hefsek in fields. If you start cutting shachas before it grew a third, then that's not a hefsek in the field, even if you carry on after it grows a third. So Rabbi Zira asked, now Rabbi Yehuda said, if you start cutting before it grows a third, and even if later on you end up finishing cutting after it grows a third, you're potter from leket shikha peah. And Rameh said if you start cutting before it grows a third, and even you carry on, and then it grows the third, you're potter from leket shikha peah. And the same thing as far as being mafsik in a field. If you start cutting the shachas before it grows a third, and you finish cutting after, it's not going to be mafsik in peah. Turning to halacha base. You have like a stream in the middle of the field. If you can't start cutting it in one go, just open curtains, please. Yeah. If you can't start cutting it in one go, then that's considered a separate division. And Rabbi Yehuda said, yeah. And Rabbi Yehuda said it's masik. It does break the field into two pairs. We quote a pasuk that because of the steepness of a hill, you can't start plowing, even though you can't go there with all your vessels and so with the yoke and everything and the plowing. And then if you give one lot of peah, so they wanted to say maybe there's no machlokes over there. Chacham and Rabbi Yehuda, but we learn amas hamayim. If it's used for the whole year, it's mafsik. And Rabbi Yehuda says if you can't cut in one go, it's mafsik. So the Chachamim argue on Rabbi Yehuda. They hold that the water stream is mafsik if it's used for use, even when you can actually cut both sides in one go, it's still mafsik. Now Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said you can't start cutting it in one go. All right, you can't start cutting it in one go. It needs to be so wide that you can't cut the whole thing in one go. So if you're standing on one side and you can't reach the other side, but if you, however, could stand in the middle, then maybe it won't be mafsik if you can stand in the middle. But we find a Tana and a Brisa who argues with Bnei Yeshiva. They said, look, if you're standing in the middle and you can't cut from both sides, then that mafsik is the field. It makes the field, breaks it up into two, right? But if you're standing on one side and you can cut the other side, it could be, even according to Yehuda, it's not mafsik at all, and that it's not considered a division, right? If you can stand on one side and cut on the other. Now then they spoke about if you've got a field, a rocky area, all the width of the field. Now if you've got a rocky area, all the width of the field, and you have to lift up your plough and move it to the other side, then that also is mafsik. But if not, it's not mafsik. Now we've learned elsewhere that you have like terraces, which are 10 tefachim higher than one another. You can give one peah for the lot, and less than 10 tefachim high, you can give one. Sorry. If it's 10 tefachim high, you need a separate peah for each terrace. Whereas if it's less than that, you give one lot of peah. Now, less than that, surely if it's 6 tefachim high, you'll have to lift up the plough. How are you going to do that? So the one answers, you're right, even less than that, you have to lift up the plough. We're talking about 10 is because of the last thing, that if the terraces are connected somehow, you've got maybe one terrace on the side, or they're going at slants and connecting, then you can give one peah for the lot. Okay? Let's stop there for now.